on my way.
Adam 810, 1035 Mary.
Show us up with 925 Adam. Halldale, Rosecrans.
911, what's your emergency?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of my series, Crafts and Crimes. Every week I post a new video of myself crafting while talking about a different true crime. This week I will be talking about the case of Leroy Martin, otherwise known as the Gaffney Strangler. Leroy Martin was born on April 25, 1937 in Gaffney, South Carolina. Little is known about his childhood and life in general before he committed his crimes. This is what we know about Martin. He was convicted of assault and battery with intent to kill in 1957 after he assaulted a young girl in the woods. Leroy was sentenced to hard labor. After serving his sentence, he was married and fathered 3 sons. He found work in a textile mill and worked part-time as a cab driver. On May 20, 1967, the nude body of 32-year-old Annie Lucille Dedmond was found in Union County, South Carolina. She had been raped and strangled. Suspicion immediately fell on her husband, Roger Zane Dedmond. The couple had been out drinking together on the 19th of May at a nightclub near Gaffney. Witnesses saw the couple having an argument earlier on in the night. After making up, the couple went to a donut shop in Gaffney. Roger went inside, and when he returned to the car, Annie was gone. By all accounts, this was not the first time that she took off without telling her husband after an argument. After being informed by the police of his wife's death and identifying her body, Roger was immediately arrested. On December 12, 1967, he was convicted of manslaughter based on police testimony that he had confessed during questioning. Despite the fact that Roger Dedmond denied making these confessions and other witnesses placing him at a cafe in Spindale, North Carolina, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. On February 6, 1968, 20-year-old Nancy Carol Paris was reported missing by her husband Edward when she failed to return after taking their poodle for a walk one night. Her nude body was later found under a bridge on the 7th of February. She had been raped and strangled. She also had cigarette burns all over her back. On February 8, 1968, Leroy Martin anonymously contacted the editor of the Gaffney Ledger, Bill Gibbons, and confessed to the murders of Nancy Paris and Nancy Reinhardt. It is alleged that Martin asked Gibbons not to go check the disposal sites by himself, but that he should inform the sheriff's department. The Gaffney Sheriff's Department located the bodies of Nancy Paris, who was missing for 1 day, and Nancy Reinhardt, who went missing in January. 14-year-old Nancy Christine Reinhardt was suspected to have been killed earlier on February 8, before Leroy Martin's phone call to Bill Gibbons. Her body was found buried under a brush pile with one of her feet sticking out. She was also raped and strangled. A coroner determined that both Nancys were murdered less than 24 hours before their bodies were discovered. This fact led many to believe that Reinhardt was held captive since her disappearance. Her family had reported her missing in January 1968. On February 10, the case was assigned to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. That same afternoon, a man contacted them to report he had seen the killer. This unknown man described the killer as a white man driving a 1957 black Chevrolet while disposing of Nancy Paris's body. When the man was asked why he hadn't come forward earlier, he is reported to have admitted to being a married man who was with his lover at the time. Leroy Martin contacted Bill Gibbons again on February 12, and this was when he admitted to being the real killer of Annie Dedmond. During this phone call, Martin made several claims. First, he said that Annie had been killed in March of 1967, not May as had been reported. Martin said of Roger Dedmond, quote, "He's serving my time." He went on to say that he had killed Nancy Reinhardt on December 29, not February 6 like the coroner had stated. Leroy also claimed to have killed Nancy Paris's poodle along with her. He concluded the phone call by calling himself, quote, a psycho, and if they don't catch me there will be more deaths. On February 13, 15-year-old Opal Diane Buxton was abducted from a school bus stop. She was forced into the trunk of a car. Her siblings witnessed the abduction. Her sister Gracie was able to provide a description of the car but not of the man who had abducted her sister. After learning of Opal's abduction, a large-scale manhunt began. 2 local men assisting with the search, Henry Transu and Lester Skinner, spotted a car on a dirt road in a heavily wooded area. When the man in the car saw them, he quickly jumped in the car and began driving away. Henry and Lester followed the car, and when it pulled into a driveway they took down the plate number. The car belonged to local textile worker and part-time cab driver Leroy Martin, who was placed under round-the-clock police surveillance. On February 15, Nancy Reinhardt's family hosted a visitation at their house. Martin showed up and spoke to Nancy's sister saying, quote, "She sure is a pretty girl, I don't see how anybody could have done this to her." The next day Opal Buxton's body was found in the same wooded area where Leroy Martin's car was spotted by Henry Transu and Lester Skinner. She was nude, she had been strangled and stabbed to death. Leroy Martin was charged on February 27, 1968, for all 4 murders. The sheriff took evidence and questioned him, but he was denied adequate counsel during this time, so they didn't seek the death penalty. During the trial, Martin confessed to engaging in sexual acts with the deceased body of Nancy Reinhardt. He was found guilty on all 4 charges and sentenced to life in prison at Central Correctional Institute in Columbia, South Carolina. On February 29, 1968, shortly after Leroy Martin was arrested, Dedmond was released from prison and returned home to his toddler son. After Martin pled guilty to Annie Lucille Dedmond's murder, the charges against Dedmond were dismissed on September 16, 1968. Dedmond had served 10 months in prison. During Leroy Martin's imprisonment, he told his mother that he had a split personality. He claimed that his violent half would take over his physical movements. On May 31, 1972, Martin was stabbed to death by fellow inmate 30-year-old Kenneth Marshall Rumsey. He was stabbed in his back and chest, killing him instantly, while working his janitor assignment. A few days after stabbing Leroy Martin to death, Kenneth Rumsey was charged by the state for the crime. 5 years later, Rumsey committed suicide. Random fact: the serial killers in the Season 2 Criminal Minds episode The Last Word are both based on Leroy Martin. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Crafts and Crimes. If you're interested in the things I'm crafting, please check out the links in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and comment below with what future cases you want me to talk about. Don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on any future uploads. I'll see you all next time.